103. And what you just heard is the, of course, recording. We are recording this, so folks who were unable to attend this evening can view it online later. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, so welcome everybody to the Casey Creek Floodplain Mapping Virtual Open House. With us on the call this evening is our Director of Water Engineering Resources, who is Euro. We have Chris, who is our GIS specialist, Matt Craig, who is our planner, our manager of planning and regulations, and Shoba, who is also a water resources engineer as well. And my name is Shannon Gutowski. I am the community relations coordinator with Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority. So the presentation will take about a half hour, and then we certainly welcome any questions you may have. And just to run through what you can expect from the presentation this evening, we'll be reviewing draft hazard mapping for Casey Creek. And the hazard mapping includes floodplains, slopes, and meander belts. This is an opportunity to discuss concerns and questions on properties within the regulatory floodplain and hazard limits. It's also an opportunity to discuss the responsibility of property owners within the regulatory limit, and also to inform you of the services that conservation authorities can provide concerning development activities within the regulatory floodplain and regulation limit. And again, of course, at the end, we'll certainly welcome any questions or address any concerns you have. And welcome everybody. We appreciate having you on the line this evening. So just to give you a little bit of background about Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority and who we are and what we do, we were established in 1968. Our Mississippi Valley watershed is approximately 3,700 square kilometers. It starts in the west at Bon Echo Provincial Park near Cloyne along Highway 41 and stretches all the way east to Fitzroy Harbor and empties into the Ottawa River at that point. We also have the Carp River watershed within our jurisdiction, and the Carp River is contained entirely within the City of Ottawa, and that's approximately 306 square kilometers. We're governed by 11 member municipalities with 17 board members and approximately 26 staff, sometimes a little bit more in the summertime. I'm going to pass things over to Matt Craig now.
Thank you, Shannon. I'll just briefly talk about our roles, responsibilities, and our programs, because they vary in degrees of mandates and responsibility in regard to provincial objectives. So the province delegates certain responsibilities to the conservation authorities in regard to management of hazards, so floodplains, wetlands, slopes, and meander belts. And as part of the review and management of these programs, these are implemented through our regulations and through plan review. So when municipalities are considering an application for development, they circulate the Conservation Authority in certain circumstances. So those are core functions that we provide. Other core functions include monitoring. Some of the provincial water quality and groundwater quality monitoring is a core function. Watershed planning as well. Then, as I mentioned, a different level of delivery is one that we have partnerships with the municipalities, and that is when there's an application for development, and we would review certain things like impacts of water quality from stormwater effects and environmental impacts, statements in regard to woodlands and wetlands, and connectivity between those features. So that's a service we provide the municipalities. It's not a core function, but we have a relationship with the City of Ottawa and our other member municipalities provide those services. And lastly, other objectives that are set, priorities that are set by the board of directors include education and stewardship. So staff and program managers implement programs to facilitate improvements along water courses and wetlands, and
Okay, so we lost Matt. He's having some technical difficulty. He is trying to get back on right now, so we'll just give it a couple minutes. Okay, and Matt is back with us. Thank you for your patience.
I'm sorry, can you hear me, Shannon?
Yes.
I apologize. I've logged in on my phone. Things happen with my network. Again, I apologize. If we could just go to the next slide.
Sure.
As I mentioned, we have delegated responsibilities, and just to expand on some of those, and provide an example. So we review under the Planning Act. So we're circulated all types of planning applications, including subdivisions, severances, minor variances. So, for example, if someone's trying to sever their property, they make an application to their municipality through the Planning Act, and the Conservation Authority would provide comments in regard to the risks and the hazards. So we would provide a hazard review, and that again is our delegated responsibility. How that differs between our regulations is that once an application is approved, if there's any technical requirements to mitigate impacts and to avoid impacts, we have policies that we administer through the Conservation Authorities Act. The easiest example is flooding, where we require dwellings to be flood-proofed or to avoid hazards such as slopes and meander belts and organic soils. So they differ in responsibilities, and they're two different processes, but they're more often not merged. And then again, as I mentioned, we have an advisory role to municipalities to comment on woodlands or water quality, stormwater. So if anybody's looking at submitting a planning application, the Conservation Authority would be involved from that perspective. Next slide, please. And again, I'm not just other things that are related to core responsibilities are, again, mapping natural hazards, as we're here today to see about Casey Creek. Flood forecasting and warning. We've had two significant floods since 2017 in the Ottawa area. As well as flooding, we also have low water response, and we provide advice to municipalities on water usage. Given the impact of climate change, the droughts are also a significant concern. So we have our plan review and our development review approval through, which I mentioned, are two different processes. And another thing that's important for that of note is source protection plans through the Clean Water Act. For example, there's water intake in the village of Carp and Crown Place and Almont, and there's certain restrictions around the development around water sources that the Conservation Authority administers. And the Mississippi Valley is somewhat unique. We operate a lot of structures along the Mississippi River. We have 18 dams that we operate, and we own 11. So we have a significant amount of infrastructure within our water, which is significant. Okay, the next slide, please. So as for Casey Creek, we've mapped and identified areas of risk using provincial protocols. These areas do become regulated once approved by the board of directors. We try to do our due diligence and contact landowners in regard to the study and potential constraints on their property. The purpose of identifying these hazards is to identify risk, be able to mitigate the risk, and that affects not only the current landowners, but any future landowner that may, when property changes hands. And this ensures continuous sustainable development. So I think I'm finished. Thank you, Shannon.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
All right. Next slide, please, Shannon. Okay, so I will start with a little bit of introduction on what is regulatory hazard mapping. Hazard mapping is really a process that identifies floodplains and erosion hazard areas associated with water bodies, such as streams, rivers, or lakes. So we're basically looking at two natural hazards, flooding and erosion. Flooding is associated with floodplains, which are defined as low-lying areas adjacent to water bodies that are subject to flooding. And erosion is typically associated with unstable slopes, which are potentially subject to land regression or retreat due to natural erosion processes. Next slide, please. So why we map floodplains? The short answer is to protect people and property from natural hazards. Floodplain maps help us to identify and delineate risk areas along our water courses. I hear some background noises. If you would not mind mute yourself, please. Thank you. Then floodplain maps also assist us in flood risk mitigation and emergency management operations. Floodplain maps are used in public awareness programs to inform public of potential risks. Then municipalities adopt floodplain maps in their official plans and zoning schedules. And finally, floodplain maps are used by conservation authorities such as MVCA, which have legislative responsibility to regulate development adjacent to water courses through Section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act, as Matt mentioned previously. Next slide, please. So MVCA is conducting several floodplain mapping studies within the City of Ottawa limits. These studies are being completed through a collaboration involving the city and the Mississippi Valley, Rideau Valley, and South Asian conservation authorities. Our recently completed projects are listed on the slide here. So we've completed floodplain mapping projects for Ottawa River, Pool Creek, Huntley Creek, Feed Mill, and so on. You can find more details about these projects on our website. Next slide. So let's have a look at Casey Creek now. Casey Creek watershed is located in Ottawa's northeast corner. So it's pretty much just northwest of Canada. You can see the watershed highlighted in green on this map. The watershed is approximately 55 square kilometers, so it's pretty small watershed. Casey Creek itself, the main channel is approximately 6.5 kilometers long and outlets into Constance Lake, which then flows through Constance Creek and discharges to Ottawa River. Next slide. So this slide really outlines the floodplain mapping process. Floodplain maps are produced using a science-based methodology. First, the background data is collected on land use, soils, topography, stream levels and flows, precipitation, and other characteristics. Then, field surveys collect information on local infrastructure, culverts, bridges, water crossings, bathymetry. And then in the next step, this data is entered into computer models to calculate stream flows and water levels. And in the final step, all the technical work and modeling is peer-reviewed by a third-party engineer. And after that, the floodplain mapping is finalized and presented to MVCA board for adoption. Next slide, please. MVCA follows provincial guidelines and standards for defining flood and erosion hazards. In our watershed in the Mississippi, and Carp River, the regulatory flood standard is the 100-year flood event. And what is really the 100-year event? It is a major flood that has a 1% chance of occurrence in any given year. So it is important to understand that if the 100-year event, say, occurs this year, doesn't mean that it cannot reoccur again next year or the year after. And this figure here on this slide depicts the delineation of flood and erosion hazards. The erosion hazard might not always be present, and if there is no erosion hazard, then the regulation limit is only based on the flooding hazard. Next slide, please. So now we would like to give you a quick demonstration of the new floodplain maps for Casey Creek that you can access from our website. And with that, I will turn it to you, Chris, now.
All right, thanks, Hiro. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Can everyone see that there? I have a web map pulled up.
Yeah, you're good.
That's good. Okay. Yeah. So first of all, my name's Chris. I'm the GIS specialist at Mississippi Valley Conservation. I'm just going to walk you through briefly the maps that we've produced for Casey Creek. So what you can see here in blue is the center line for Casey Creek. And as Hiro mentioned, the main channel here runs right down the center and is about 6.5 kilometers, stretching from Marchurst down at the south end north to Constance Lake at the northeast end. As you can see, there are 3 tributaries that supply the main branch of Casey Creek. So what you can see here are 3 different layers. First of all, as I mentioned, you can see in blue the center line of Casey Creek. In red represents the regulatory flood limit, or sorry, the regulatory flood line. And then in yellow, we have the regulation limit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to search around to a few properties and give you some more reference as to what these lines represent and what they look like on any given property. So I'm just going to zoom here to 1490. Murphy. So zooming in, you can kind of see what these lines represent. The red line, as I mentioned, is the floodplain. And so everything within the red line represents area that is subject to flooding under the 100-year flood criteria. Just beyond the red line, we have the regulatory limit. And so in this area here, the regulatory limit is 15 meters past the 100-year floodplain. So it's just 15 meters past the floodplain there. And I'm just going to move up the road here to give another example. Oh, sorry, I'll turn the parcels on for you as well. So as you can see, the floodplain is generally confined to the watercourse. It may span out in certain areas depending on the topography of the land. But if you look along the floodplain as well, the regulatory limit, as I mentioned, is exactly 15 meters beyond the extent of the floodplain. And I'll just zoom to one more property here, 2165 Dunrobin. Oh, sorry, old second line. And there's just one more example there of what the floodplain and regulatory limit could look like at any given property. So that is all for now. I'm just going to zoom out and provide you a bit of context here for where we are. And so as you can see, the full extent of our study is within my window here. And yeah, I think that's all I've got for the demonstration there. So I'll hand it back over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for the demonstration. And I'll just wait for Shannon to load up the slides again. I think we have a couple more slides here. Yes, so what are the next steps? So maps have been prepared. At this stage, we are seeking public input, comments, and then, maps will be finalized. All comments will be addressed and presented to our board for approval. Once adopted by our board, the final maps will be shared with the City of Ottawa for incorporation into land use planning documents. And that's really, that will complete the process. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I believe this is our last slide. So please let us know if you have any questions. I guess we can now have a discussion, and you can also ask questions at a later time. And we have provided our project contacts on this slide at MVCA and the City of Ottawa. So thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so I'm going to now open the floor to any questions. You can either raise your hand using the hand part of Zoom, or you can type your question in the chat. And we'd be more than happy to answer your question now, or as Euro said, we'll certainly welcome your comments via email as well, whatever you're comfortable with. And for those of you who came in a little bit late to the presentation, it will be on our website in full as of tomorrow. So you can go back and catch the first few minutes that you missed. But I'm not seeing any questions. One more call for questions. Oh, there's one. Has Casey Creek ever had a 100-year flood, or did the 2019 flood have an impact? Euro or Matt, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Unfortunately, we don't have any streamflow measurements in the Casey Creek watershed that would allow us to tell, if we had a 100-year flood event in the past, right? So we had to use indirect techniques to estimate the 100-year rate of the flood event. In terms of 2019, I will pass it on Matt because I don't think I was around in that year, and I cannot comment on the extent of the 2019 flooding in Watershed.
Again, you mentioned we don't have flow data for Casey Creek, but in looking at nearby watercourses in 2019, the Carp River did not experience the 1 to 100 year event. Snowfall in the northern part of the province certainly impacted the Ottawa River, and especially snowfall up in the Highlands area around Bon Echo Park and in the beginning or the headwaters of our watershed impacted the whole Mississippi system. So again, this is not connected to either of those systems. Given what we saw in the Carp Creek, we haven't Carp River. I'm sorry, we haven't had any record of high flows in the past 3 years when we experienced 4 years since we experienced those two significant events in other parts of the watershed.
It's Murray Pearson here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Murray.
Oh, excellent. I just was curious, does the yellow line then represent the area where buildings would not be allowed to be constructed over the course, ad nauseum sort of thing? Is that the intent of the thing, is to restrict construction of real estate buildings in that yellow area?
Perhaps, Chris, you could bring up a map. Is that possible? So
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll pull it back up here.
thank you for the question, Murray. The yellow line is the regulation limit. That doesn't necessarily prohibit development in that area. The red line is a no-touch line. It's the flood plain and it's the flood hazard. So anything within that line has been modeled, and that's where you have your significant flood risk. So if a landowner has a question about constraints on the property, the yellow line is basically a flag for the Conservation Authority to look at that property in detail, because there are potentially slope and meander belt risk associated with that area. So it doesn't prohibit it, but it does, it warrants further analysis of that property.
Could you call up 1161 Murphy Side Road, the drainage ditch that runs through my property?
Yeah, sure.
1161. 1161. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was one of the tributaries, and so the flood line is quite confined in this area. I'll trying to get it all in view here. If you'd like me to zoom in, just let me know.
Okay. Okay. All right, because I've been considering severing property in the southwest corner of that field that borders on Murphy Side Road. It wouldn't appear to affect me then because it would not reach to the yellow line.
Is that the area that's tilled, Murray, in that corner then?
That's
Right
correct.
there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
The only restriction I would see, and it's be a recommendation, is that we don't recommend or support putting generally putting the lines through, so the property lines through a hazard. So I think if you were continuing it all the way to the east side of your property, that would be fine. But segmenting and fragmenting the hazard is not generally supported. So generally, because we don't want to deal with as many landowners, and it just in regard to administration of the hazard, it just becomes more problematic. So does that make sense to you? So one line through it, but a whole bunch of fragmentation, significant fragmentation would probably be something that we would try to work with a solution with the landowner so that there's minimal ownership fragmentation of the hazard. Does that make sense?
The hazard being the area within the yellow lines?
Correct, or the red line. The red
Yeah.
line more than the floodplain, more than the regulation limit.
If I were to proceed with a severance, it wouldn't go as far as the yellow line, so it would be outside the yellow line.
Then I wouldn't anticipate any major concern from the Conservation Authority in regard to this mapping and the hazard.
Okay, all right. Okay, interesting that it stops at Murphy Side Road and doesn't continue on through the property on the south side. Interesting. Because that water goes through there at the same speed through my property as it does through the other owner's property on the south side of the Murphy Side Road.
I'm not sure about the study limits, but again, I think Chris mentioned this was a tributary.
Yeah, that is where we ended the study, was right at Murphy Side Road there.
Yeah, that's fine. No, that answered my, that was the question I had really, was just what implications there would be for me should at some point in the future I decide to sever anything there, that it would be it wouldn't be an issue then. Okay. All right, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm not seeing any more questions unless someone else just wants to jump on. And again, you can always email or call our office to get in touch with us if you think of something afterwards. So not seeing any more questions, I want to thank everybody for their time this evening, for joining us, and we hope you found this helpful. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions down the road. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.